President Trump rips into what he calls the so-called Republicans over Obamacare, and NFL players again over kneeling. The president insists more Puerto Rico help is on the way. Plus, do more guns equal a safer America? This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Bret Baier. We're coming to you again tonight live from the White House on the North Lawn here. President Trump is promising to make America competitive again. That is the opening pitch in his latest tax reform push, following a meeting today with congressional tax writers and ahead of a trip to lay out the framework of a plan tomorrow. But much of the day today was devoted to the real-life nightmare that is Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, the new threats from North Korea, and the public relations flare-up over NFL protests. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight here on the North Lawn. John?
Brett, good evening to you. Tomorrow will be all about tax reform. That's when the president and the White House roll out their proposal. Today, the president was on offense in the Rose Garden as he met the press. In the Rose Garden with Spain's Prime Minister, President Trump today brushed away criticism of his response to the unfolding disaster in Puerto Rico, rejecting the notion he was more focused on the NFL flag flap.
I wasn't preoccupied with the NFL. I was ashamed of what was taking place because, to me, that was a very important moment. I don't think you can disrespect our country, our flag, our national anthem.
The president says he has plenty of time to focus on the NFL and Puerto Rico and insisted the federal government has been getting, quote, tremendous reviews in its response to Hurricane Maria.
We are unloading on an hourly basis massive loads of water and food and supplies for Puerto Rico. And this isn't like Florida, where we can go right up the spine, or like Texas, where we go right down the middle and we distribute. This is, a thing called the Atlantic Ocean.
After briefing the president this afternoon on the response efforts, FEMA Administrator Brock Long emerged to say 10 more ships and barges are en route to Puerto Rico loaded with supplies. Getting electricity online, he said, is a top priority.
We've proactively asked the mission assigned the Army Corps of Engineers to basically take oversight and management of not only the emergency power restoration, but also the initial part of rebuilding the entire grid.
President Trump also responded today to the declaration by North Korea's foreign minister that his nation is now at war with the United States and will shoot down any American aircraft that comes near the peninsula.
We are totally prepared for the second option, not a preferred option. But if we take that option, it will be devastating, I can tell you that, devastating for North Korea. That's called the military option.
As the president left the White House bound for a fundraiser in New York, the White House was explaining why some top current and former officials, including Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, Gary Cohn, Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, and Reince Priebus, occasionally used personal email accounts to conduct White House business. According to Kushner's attorney, Abby Lowell, Kushner's private emails about White House business number fewer than 100, and that all of them have been archived. Hillary Clinton, who still insists her email scandal was, quote, overblown and involved no real scandal, reacted this way.
It's just the height of hypocrisy. It is something that, if they were sincere about, I think you'd have Republican members of Congress calling for an investigation.
In fact, top congressional investigator Trey Gowdy, together with Elijah Cummings, are investigating. And White House attorney Ty Cobb insists relevant personal emails will be provided to special counsel Robert Mueller, telling Fox News, quote, we'll see to it that the special counsel receives everything he is entitled to. A source familiar with the investigation tells Fox News that the special counsel Robert Mueller may interview one or more White House staff members before the end of this week. Mueller wants to know more about that meeting aboard Air Force One that led to the incomplete statement Donald Trump Jr. put out initially about his meeting with that Russian attorney in June of 2016, right?
And the president travels tomorrow to make this tax reform kind of roll out.
Yeah, he's going to Indiana. They've decided on all of the parameters on it. We were actually briefed on it, but we can't tell anybody about it until 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. But it's well known what the president was asking for during the campaign. We know what he wants, and we'll see what he gets.
Yeah, and worked out on the committees on really the details.
Exactly. That's up to Congress to come up with the final details.
All right, John, thanks.
Good to see you.
This morning, the president said at some point there will be an Obamacare repeal and replace. This afternoon, the top Republican in the Senate effectively said it will not be anytime soon. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill tonight with the latest. Good evening, Mike.
Well, Bret, good evening. The Graham Cassidy health care reform bill will not come up for a vote in the Senate this week, but those fighting for this legislation insist it is not over yet.
We've made the decision, since we don't have the votes, we will postpone that vote. Okay? And am I disappointed? Absolutely.
Well, it took 18 months to pass Obamacare. It's going to take a while to repeal it, but here's what I want you to know. There are 50 votes for the substance. There are not 50 votes for the process.
Senators Susan Collins of Maine, Ted Cruz of Texas, John McCain of Arizona, and Kentucky's Rand Paul all said they were a no on Graham Cassidy as of today. Republican leaders could only afford 2 GOP defections. President Trump was clearly frustrated.
At some point, there will be a repeal and replace, but we'll see whether or not that point is now or will it be shortly thereafter. But we are disappointed in certain so-called Republicans.
Now it is back to the drawing board for Senate Republican leadership, and the focus shifts to another huge agenda item.
We plan to move forward on our next priority, which is reforming the American tax code in a significant way for the first time in 30 years.
Democrats are calling for a return to the Republican Senator Lamar Alexander and Democrat Senator Patty Murray bipartisan talks. They were working on some steps that could be taken to help stabilize the insurance markets. But Alexander called off the talks last week, saying they could not reach consensus. The Senate Democratic leader says it isn't over yet.
Today, Americans breathe a sigh of relief because the health care of millions has been protected and preserved. We Democrats believe this is not a day for celebration, but a day to roll up our sleeves and work to make the health care system better.
Schumer praised Democrat unity. Democrats stuck together on this one. Republicans avoided another high-profile health care reform disaster on the Senate floor. Bret?
Mike, shortly after that news broke, there was this other bombshell, a high-profile Senate GOP retirement.
That's right. The Senate Foreign Relations Chairman Bob Corker of Tennessee has announced he will not seek a third term. He will retire after next year. We caught up with Corker late today.
Serving in the Senate for 2 terms is what has allowed me to be the independent voice that sometimes says things that shock you guys, and you know, I just felt like I was moving into sort of a career politician mode, thinking about third term, and just wasn't me.
A number of Republican sources say they are not terribly surprised by this announcement, saying they felt like Corker has had enough here on Capitol Hill. Bret?
That is big news. Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. The president will head to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands next week to see the devastation there from Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria firsthand. In the meantime, he's promising a major recovery effort. Correspondent Garrett Tenney is in San Juan tonight.
Nearly a week after the hurricane's deadly swipe, Puerto Rico remains an island wanting. Many of the island's more than 3.4 million American citizens are still without adequate food, water, and fuel. While gas stations, banks, and supermarkets are gradually reopening, there are limited supplies, long lines, and plenty of frustration.
We hope to receive more merchandise soon so we can provide to all our clients. We are restricting so we can give something to everyone to extend what we have left.
Finally, I got to fill my tank, which was totally empty, and now I've been waiting here a couple of hours for, to get cash because we're out of cash.
Relief supplies are beginning to arrive by freighter and by air, but many hard-hit rural areas are still in search and rescue mode, with first responders treating patients on the spot. For many, it may be the only care they get. Hospitals report severe overcrowding, meaning some with much-needed medical procedures are being forced to wait.
My brother had an accident 2 days before Ms. Maria visited us, and he was waiting for surgery. He injured his back, his spinal cord. He is waiting.
Officials say the biggest challenge is restoring electricity. 100% of the power grid's distribution network remains damaged. Power poles and streetlights are strewn about, and more than half the island's transmission towers are completely destroyed. Communication is spotty at best. San Juan's International Airport has become a sweatbox of stranded passengers.
I've been here since Friday and I haven't been able to leave. Sleeping on the floor without air conditioner, it's horrible, and I have to sleep here again. It's very frustrating.
The governor telling Fox News' Geraldo Rivera the situation remains a humanitarian crisis of apocalyptic proportions.
The infrastructure has been severely damaged. It's going to be an unprecedented and unfolding events that are going to be occurring with energy, telecoms, and water, and so forth.
The Trump administration has promised a long-term financial recovery plan that may include forgiving much of the $73 billion in government debt accrued over the years by Puerto Rico. You can see, despite a nationwide 7 p.m. curfew, that folks here are desperate for fuel. Some of them have been waiting in line now for more than 8 hours. Everywhere you go and everyone you talk to, they say they need help. But sadly, for most of the country, including here in the capital, that help is still several days away. Bret?
Garrett Tenney live in San Juan. Garrett, thank you. President Trump says previous administrations left him with a mess with North Korea that he will fix. Also, hearing tonight from the parents of an American student who died shortly after being released from North Korean custody. Correspondent Rich Edson reports from the State Department.
Fred and Cindy Warmbier would finally see their son Otto returned from a North Korean prison after more than a year in captivity.
We weren't prepared for what we had. And then when we saw Otto the way he was, we loved him, we're proud of him, but no mother, no parent should ever have gone through what we went through.
Otto had a shaved head. He had a feeding tube coming out of his nose. He was staring blankly into space, jerking violently. He was blind. He was deaf.
Otto died less than a week later, on June 19th. North Korea says Warmbier's death is a mystery and claims it is the victim.
But North Korea is not a victim. They're terrorists. They kidnapped Otto. They tortured him. They intentionally injured him.
He then called on the U.S. government to list North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism. That would immediately impose even more restrictions on North Korea.
This is something that we constantly assess. I know the Secretary has certainly looked at that, had looked at that certainly in the past when it came to Otto Warmbier. I don't know if that's something that we're looking at today.
The administration today announced additional sanctions targeting 8 North Korean banks and 26 people linked to North Korea's finance network. The president also thanked Chinese President Xi Jinping.
I applaud China's latest action to restrict its trade with North Korea. And in particular, I applaud China for breaking off all banking relationships with North Korea, something that people would have thought unthinkable even 2 months ago.
President Trump and North Korea resumed their threat exchanges. Administration officials claim the U.S. can easily overwhelm North Korean capabilities if attacked. Those say they want to avoid war.
We're going to continue to pursue our diplomatic efforts and hope that that's the way we'll solve this.
And those diplomatic efforts take Secretary Tillerson back to Beijing. The State Department announced earlier today that the secretary will be returning there, traveling out Thursday to discuss President Trump's trip to China, along with economic and diplomatic issues, and of course, North Korea. Bret?
And Rich, the Cuban foreign minister is at the State Department.
He just left, Bret. The Cuban foreign minister was here for a little more than an hour. The State Department says the Cuban government requested this meeting. The State Department also says that Secretary Tillerson has plenty of questions for the Cuban government. This, as the department says, that exactly 21 American diplomats have been harmed in what has been described as these sonic attacks down in Havana, left some with permanent hearing damage. The U.S. is investigating. Federal authorities are in Cuba investigating. And yet the United States has not blamed anyone, not blamed the Cuban government or any other government, as there are still many questions around these mysterious attacks we're still trying to figure out at this hour, Bret.
Rich Edson live at the State Department. Rich, thanks. Now to the election tonight. Voters in Alabama have a little less than 2 hours left to cast their ballots in a surprisingly close Republican Senate primary runoff. That has been a battle inside the Republican Party, stretching all the way back here to the nation's capital. Correspondent Peter Ducey is in Birmingham right now.
Judge Roy Moore is trying to take the reins of Alabama's Republican Senate nomination in today's runoff. But pulling up to a polling place on a horse named Sundance isn't even the most head-turning thing he's done since last night. At a rally in Fairhope, Moore defended his record on guns, then pulled one out of his pocket.
I believe in the Second Amendment.
In Moore's corner, Steve Bannon. The former White House strategist is backing a different candidate than the president, and Bannon warned voters last night about establishment Republicans like Majority Leader Mitch McConnell who are backing Senator Luther Strange.
They think you're a pack of morons. They think you're nothing but rubes. They have no interest at all in what you have to say, what you have to think, or what you want to do.
Bannon believes Judge Moore is best positioned to implement the Trump agenda, but Strange insists he's not the reason Republican priorities like repeal and replace are stalled.
I'm the one out here taking the brunt of the failure to keep their commitments. I can understand the frustration. I'm the most frustrated person in the Senate, believe me.
Strange trails in recent polls, so the president keeps pushing him. Tweeting today, quote, Luther Strange has been shooting up in the Alabama polls since my endorsement. Finish the job. Vote today for Big Luther.
The Vice President of the United States.
The Vice President is trying to pull Strange ahead, too, telling a Birmingham crowd if they want to build a wall or repeal Obamacare, they need Strange.
But Alabama, make no mistake about it, President Trump and our entire team are just getting started. Our president needs Luther Strange back in the United States Senate so we can finish the job.
Luther Strange already holds the title tallest U.S. Senator in modern history, but he could have one of the shortest terms in recent memory if the Republican Party's heavy hitters cannot pull him to a win. The polls close here in Alabama in less than 2 hours. Brett?
Peter Ducey live in Birmingham. Peter, thank you. We'll have complete coverage here on Fox News Channel as the results come in tonight and a wrap-up tomorrow. The longtime CEO of Equifax is out. The company says Richard Smith is retiring, effective immediately. Smith will not receive his annual bonus and other benefits until Equifax completes its review of the data breach that exposed information on 143 million Americans. The company's chief information and security officers have already left. More executives may be in jeopardy following word that Equifax did not respond to a warning in March about a potential software flaw, eventually exploited by hackers. Stocks were mixed today. The Dow lost 12. The S&P 500 gained a fraction. The Nasdaq was up 10. The Veterans Affairs Department tonight says even with emergency funding, its private health care program for veterans may run out of money as soon as December. This comes weeks after the initiative received $2.1 billion. Now the VA is asking for a long-term legislative fix that would give veterans even wider access to private doctors. A civilian with a gun stops a masked murderer. We'll talk about gun ownership and its effect on crime when we come back. Welcome back to the White House. As you look at the West Wing there, former Trump campaign advisor Roger Stone says he is aware of no evidence of coordination between the Trump team and Russia. Stone spent 3 hours talking with the House Intelligence Committee, mostly about communications with unnamed hacker Guccifer and through an intermediary with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
At least the entire exchange, which takes place between August 15th and September 9th. Many weeks after the publication by WikiLeaks of the DNC material, meaning collusion with Guccifer in the hacking and release of that material, unless I owned a time machine, which I do not.
Stone also says he has never heard from special counsel Robert Mueller that President Trump should fire Mueller, according to Stone, and that former Trump campaign chief Paul Manafort does, in fact, expect to be indicted. Here at the White House, one of the major disputes in this building and on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue in recent decades, of course, has been over guns. Many people want to get rid of private. Others say the weapons are necessary to save lives and obviously point to the Second Amendment. We have one case study tonight following a deadly shooting at a church in Tennessee. Here's correspondent Doug McElway.
22-year-old Caleb Engel did what few would under the circumstances. Though unarmed, he confronted a gunman who randomly opened fire during Sunday services at Nashville's Burnett Chapel Church of Christ. As the two struggled, witnesses say the gunman shot himself in the chest, giving time for Engel, who has a right to carry permit, to run outside and fetch his own weapon. He came back to hold the suspect at bay, potentially sparing further carnage. Engel's father spoke afterwards.
I sit and think, what if? What if he would pull the trigger because he had the gun pointed at him? But, yeah, I'm proud of him.
It is unclear whether the suspect, Emmanuel Sampson, was a legal gun owner. He was a refugee from Sudan's civil war in the mid-1990s, in which 2 million were killed, according to press reports last June. He texted his father, quote, "I have a gun to my head. Have a nice expletive life." 16.4 million Americans like Engel have the right to carry firearms publicly. John Lott, author of More Guns, Less Crime, says that fact contributes to lower crime rates.
The states that have had the biggest increase in concealed carry permits have seen the biggest relative drops in violent crime. Murder, for each additional percent increase that you have in concealed carry permits, you have about 1.5% drop in murder rates.
But a 2004 National Academy of Sciences study, quote, found no credible evidence that the passage of right to carry laws decreases or increases violent crime. A study with which some disagree.
It does seem to be the case that if you allow just anyone to carry concealed weapons, you're going to pay a higher price in terms of increased violent crime.
While that debate continues in Congress, momentum is building for the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act of 2017. It has 212 co-sponsors in the House and would allow an eligible person to carry a concealed handgun in any state where it's legal. Bret?
Doug, thanks. Violent crime, including homicides, shootings, and robberies, second straight year in 2016. That's according to just released FBI statistics. It's the first such rise in consecutive years in more than a decade. Chicago saw a 60% jump in killings from 2015. That accounts for more than 20% of the nation's increase in murders. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is calling on law enforcement to confront and turn back what he calls the rising tide of violent crime. 84% of New Jersey voters say if Democratic Senator Bob Menendez is convicted on corruption charges, he should resign. That's according to a Suffolk University poll for USA Today. Let's get the latest on that trial. Correspondent David Lee Miller reports from Newark.
After days of testimony from witnesses on how U.S. Senator Robert Menendez received tens of thousands of dollars in gifts from wealthy eye doctor Solomon Melgen, and how Senator Menendez used his influence to help obtain visas for the doctor's foreign girlfriends, the focus of the bribery trial has shifted. Prosecutors are now trying to convince the jury that Menendez attempted to help the doctor in a number of business deals as part of the bribery scheme. One witness who worked for a company that processes Medicare claims described, quote, a contentious phone call with Menendez staffers who argued on the doctor's behalf regarding $9 million in Medicare overbilling. According to the indictment, Menendez unsuccessfully used his influence with former Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius to try and get the government to drop the accusations. Melgen was later convicted of 67 criminal charges. There was also testimony about another business venture. Dr. Melgen's multi-million-dollar investment in a port security company faced an uncertain future in 2004 after the Dominican Republic stopped honoring the deal. Commerce Department trade specialist Scott Smith told the court of a 2012 meeting with an attorney representing Dr. Melgen, who wanted the U.S. to pressure Dominican officials to keep the agreement with Melgen's port security company. Smith said Melgen's attorney said his client, quote, had politically influential friends and they could cause a lot of problems for the Commerce Department, adding that he could be a bull in the Commerce Department china shop. Questioned by the prosecutor why he had such a clear recollection of the encounter, Smith responded, quote, this was probably the most threatening meeting I ever had at Commerce. There was no testimony Menendez was aware of the meeting. When pressed by the prosecution who Melgen's attorney was talking about when he said his client had politically influential friends, Smith replied, Senator Menendez. Bret?
David Lee Miller outside the courthouse in Newark. David Lee, thanks. Up next, Kurds vote for independence. Now what? Back live on the north lawn of the White House, there are more rumblings from Iraq's neighbors over the landslide result of Kurdistan's independence referendum. Correspondent Benjamin Hall has that story from Erbil, Iraq.
ISIS fighters are still out there, just across from these Kurdish front lines. But today, Kurdish soldiers are preparing to defend against a very different threat: Baghdad. These positions were built in 2015 to defend against ISIS, and in fact the terror group are still just 2 miles away. But since the referendum, this has also become the border for a possible Kurdish state. One day after around 3.3 million people voted a resounding yes to a referendum which saw over 70% turnout, these soldiers, who all proudly voted too, told me this front line was the new Kurdish border.
Be assured we will stay in these trenches, whether it's the militias or the Iraqi army who come. This is our border. We will never leave.
But today, the governor of disputed oil-rich Kirkuk, as well as other Kurdish politicians, tried to downplay this move.
Secretary of Tillerson, when he called President Barzani just 3 days ago, I believe, he asked about does the referendum mean the borders will be changed? And President Barzani and other officials, myself included, have repeatedly said this is not about drawing borders.
But every soldier I spoke to believes it is. And now, 2 US allies are sitting on a tinderbox that could erupt into a full-blown conflict. Kurds felt emboldened to hold this referendum because candidate Trump had been so supportive of Kurdish independence. Today, however, many people feel President Trump has forgotten them.
Just to remind President Trump, during the campaign, he was quite good, actually, talking about the Kurds and fighting ISIS and terrorism. And I think he should remember that.
Already, the Baghdad government is responding, holding joint military drills with Turkey on the border, and giving the Kurds till Friday for them to hand over control of all their airports. So although the front lines are calm here for today, soldiers say they're ready to fight. And those are the two things that you hear here. You hear the politicians saying we need dialogue and negotiation with the central government. You hear the people saying we want a new Kurdish state, a new country straight away because that's what we voted for. And then you hear the neighbors threatening economic and military responses, sometimes very, very harsh. And so over the next few days, we're going to see which one of those leads the way, but very tense, very uncertain moments here in Kurdistan. Bret?
Benjamin Hall, live early Wednesday morning in Erbil. Benjamin, thanks. Saudi Arabia state media says King Salman has ordered that women be allowed to drive cars in Saudi Arabia. That would end the Islamic Kingdom's status as the only country where that's forbidden. The king has ordered the formation of a ministerial body to give advice within 30 days and implement the king's order by next June. Back here in the U.S., Joint Chiefs Chairman General Joe Dunford says transgenders who meet the military standards should be allowed to stay in the service. Dunford made the comment to the Senate Armed Services Committee today. President Trump has directed the Pentagon to indefinitely extend the ban on transgenders enlisting in the U.S. military, but he has left the fate of those already serving up to Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. President Trump's Attorney General is talking about civil rights, freedom of speech, and political correctness on college campuses today. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen tells us what Attorney General Sessions is saying and how it's being received. Good evening, James.
Bret, good evening. Attorney General Sessions charged today that American colleges and universities have become, quote, echo chambers for political correctness, a shelter for fragile egos. Speaking at Georgetown University Law Center, Sessions lamented a recent incident at Kellogg Community College in Michigan, in which 2 students were arrested and briefly jailed for handing out copies of the Constitution on campus without a permit. Sessions also cited a recent survey of 450 colleges and universities conducted by the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education that found 40% of those schools maintaining speech codes that violate the First Amendment.
This permissible attitude toward the heckler's veto has spawned a cottage industry of protesters who've learned that school administrators often will capitulate to their demands. Protesters are now routinely shutting down speeches and debates across the country in an effort to silence voices that insufficiently conform to their views.
President Obama's White House Communications Director Dan Pfeiffer tweeted, "Why is Jeff Sessions giving a speech arguing for free speech on campus while Trump is arguing against free speech on NFL playing fields?" And protesters outside Georgetown blasted Sessions on that score, decrying the president's criticism of NFL players who, to protest racism, have been declining to stand for the national anthem. Sessions told Georgetown law professor Randy Barnett the president has free speech rights too.
I would note, of course, that the players aren't subject to any prosecution, but if they take a provocative act, they can expect to be condemned, and the president has the right to condemn them.
Justice Department officials also announced they are filing court papers on behalf of a student at Georgia Gwinnett College who's suing that school because it stopped him from handing out Christian literature on campus. Bret.
James, thank you. The acting head of the Drug Enforcement Administration is resigning. Fox News has confirmed that DEA Chief Chuck Rosenberg could be out by the end of the week. A major scandal tonight in college basketball. One columnist calls it Armageddon. 4 assistant coaches are among 10 people facing federal fraud and corruption charges. Government says it has found numerous instances in which bribes were paid to coaches, players, and others to steer athletes to schools, shoe sponsors, agents, financial advisors, and even tailors.
Month after month, the defendants exploited the hoop dreams of student athletes around the country, allegedly treating them as little more than opportunities to enrich themselves through bribery and fraud schemes.
For now, the assistant coaches named: Chuck Person of Auburn, Emmanuel Richardson of Arizona, Tony Bland of Southern California, and Lamont Evans of Oklahoma State. But the FBI says its investigation is continuing. President Trump promises major aid to Puerto Rico, talks tough again on North Korea, and continues to slam the NFL. We'll talk about it all with the panel when we come back.
I have plenty of time on my hands. All I do is work. I will be going to Puerto Rico on Tuesday. I'll also be going to the U.S. Virgin Islands. The governor of Puerto Rico is so thankful for the great job that we're doing. I wasn't preoccupied with the NFL. I was ashamed of what was taking place. I was at Walter Reed Hospital recently, and I saw so many great young people, and they're missing legs and they're missing arms. And by kneeling during the playing of our national anthem, I think is disgraceful. That's called the military option. If we have to take it, we will. It will be devastating, I can tell you that, devastating for North Korea. Many administrations, which left me a mess, but I'll fix the mess.
President Trump in the Rose Garden here at the White House today, talking about a host of issues, asked about a host of issues, primarily defending and saying more help for Puerto Rico is on the way. Tweeting today, thank you to Carmen Yulín Cruz, the mayor of San Juan, for your kind words on FEMA, etc. We're working hard, much food and water there on the way. Receiving some criticism from lawmakers after getting praise for Hurricane Harvey and Irma recovery in Texas and Florida. Let's bring in our panel. Here with me at the White House, Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press, and at our bureau in Washington, Steve Hayes, Editor-in-Chief of the Weekly Standard, and Bill Bennett, former Education Secretary and the host of the Bill Bennett Show podcast. Thanks for being here. Julie, I want to start with you. In the Rose Garden, it seemed like the president clearly got the Puerto Rico urgency and talked about it, and then we've had since then a number of briefings from the administration.
Today has looked a lot more like the days around Harvey and Irma, where this White House was really singularly focused on the storms, on the recovery effort. You had the president out there being really proactive with his messaging, a lot of officials out there. And so I think it has sunk in for them that this storm and the long-term recovery effort is perhaps greater than what we saw in Harvey in Texas, and that it is incumbent on the president, because these are American citizens, to be out there leading that response, to be talking about this issue, to be making clear the amount of aid that is going to Puerto Rico. It has obviously been a little bit slower for him in responding to this, and he did, I think, lose several days by focusing so much on the NFL. He can say he wasn't distracted, but it was his tweeting and his messaging on the NFL that pushed that to the forefront and overshadowed what FEMA and other agencies actually were doing for Puerto Rico.
Bill, you saw him in the Rose Garden today answering that question whether he was overtaken by that NFL issue. And he said, you know what, I can basically walk and chew gum at the same time. I work hard every day. Your thoughts on that contradiction and kind of that whole dust-up?
Well, the president does a lot of things. As we know, he's a man of tremendous energy. He doesn't nap a lot and works on a lot of things. We also know that people who do a lot get more done. You know, you have more things to do, you get more done. But what people pick up on, decide to spend time talking about on talk shows is something else. In terms of the dust-up, let me just say he's got a clear and coherent position, which is shared by a lot of the American people. I've been listening to people from the NFL, and I'm a huge football fan. As my wife said, bad enough Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We got to watch now Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We have to debate these issues about football. Anyway, that's the predicament of the country now. But there's no coherence to the view. You hear many different things from anybody who speaks about this, the reason for the protests. I'll put my education secretary hat on and say, I don't think people know American history. I don't think they know the story of the flag. Francis Scott Key, Frank Key, watching that flag as the British battered it all night long and it was still standing. I don't think they know about this Iwo Jima memorial over there where those guys are putting the flag up on Mount Suribachi. And I don't think they know, unless they saw the movie Glory, about that Sergeant William Carney who would not, born a slave, part of the 54th Massachusetts, would not let the flag fall to the ground.